Good morning. Again, my name is Nick Kridler. I'm going to be talking about this open source project that went away. Okay, there we go. Called Pyxley, and this was my first foray into open source, and so all the things that I learned over the course of the year I'm going to be talking about. So first I want to talk about Pyxley with an I. So one of our exclusive brands at Stitch Fix is Pyxley, and they actually have a number of our more popular tops and other items, but I wanted to call out something important. We actually, the data science team, some colleagues on the merge product team, developed or designed a few tops, and this is one of them. It's called the Curie, and basically these are what we call our Frankenstyles. We take components from different kinds of top-selling items, and we put them all together and see how they do. And there's actually a great blog post here that I put in that details the process, and this was really neat. But Pyxley with a Y is actually a set of helpers and widgets for building Flask and React-powered dashboards. And so in the last talk, I believe they mentioned this project called Spire, which is also aimed to be somewhat Shiny-like in terms of like R Shiny. This is supposed to be a little bit more flexible. It doesn't rely so heavily on templating, but rather some patterns in the JavaScript and then some Python wrappers. So I'm going to go over this in more detail in a little bit, but first I just wanted to talk a little bit about who I am so you have some context. I'm a data scientist at Stitch Fix and not a front-end engineer. Right? So the first time I did any sort of front-end work was at Stitch Fix because I had to build a dashboard. And the first few dashboards were in Shiny, but I'm not an active R user, and so it's much more difficult for me to debug in R than say Python. So I want to do something Flask related. I used to spend a lot of time on Kaggle. My sort of soapbox is on feature engineering and how important that is, and so most of my career has been spent around feature engineering and algorithm development. I worked in defense doing signal processing for about 7 or 8 years, and now I work on women's fashion. So, so in this talk, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what led to Pyxley and go over what it actually is and give you some more background, but then also lessons learned. So it's a lot of like what I thought was going to happen and then what actually happened. Because when you're building a tool, it's very easy to just get caught up in, this is what I'm trying to do, and you have all these examples, but you often forget that there's going to be a user, right? And there's a user that's not going to understand any of the like design ideas that you had or the motivation. So I'm going to talk about that, and then talk a little bit about what's next. So real quick, I wanted to give you an introduction about how Stitch Fix works. So we have a stylist, and the stylist picks 5 items that they're going to put into a box. Right? And so what happens is we have this recommendation engine that takes all of our inventory and decides for this piece of inventory, this is the probability that you're going to buy it. And so then a human stylist goes in and says, here's the curated list that I get from the algorithm. And maybe I have some request notes or some more information about the client, like what size they are and what colors they like and what kinds of items they wish to receive. And so they'll go in, they'll pick 5 things. And so once those 5 things are chosen, we send them to our clients, and then they get the option of keeping what they like and returning the rest. And so it's really easy. You get like a little bag for returns. If you don't want something, you just put it in the bag and drop it in a blue mailbox. So I work on the merch algorithms team at Stitch Fix. And so anything related to the inventory, like what we should buy, how much should we order, do we have the right mix of inventory, what should we throw away, all those kinds of questions are handled by the merch algorithms team. And so I work on specifically inventory quality. It's a lot like feature engineering. I'm trying to come up with metrics that characterize the health of our inventory so that at any given time we can know, do we have the right things? And the way that we provide our insights and feedback to our business partners, so I work primarily with buyers and planners. So the buyers will actually go to market and they'll find out, here's the dresses or the tops that are going to be popular for the next season, and the planners will do things like, okay, well, we have a warehouse, how much should be in the warehouse, how many styles of each department do we bring in, and so on and so forth. And so we surface all of that information through dashboards, and we have a lot of dashboards at Stitch Fix. Some that get used more than others, but I maintain a handful of them. And when I first started, it was all Shiny apps. So we had this pattern of you write a SQL query, the SQL query gets dumped into a CSV file and then put on a Shiny server, and then you have your little app that reads it and renders it. But eventually, as the business grows and as the types of information that they want is a little bit different, that just we sort of outgrew Shiny. So now I'm going to give an overview of what Pyxley is. And so really this was just an attempt for me to avoid writing R. I don't have any problems with R. I just found that for Shiny, debugging the front end stuff was a little bit more tricky. If you're working with like the stuff in Flask, then you know exactly what's being sent through. It's like JSON, and you know you can like look in the console for the JavaScript and understand what's going on. So what I did was I found some tutorials, and I made like the most basic Flask app that I could, where I had a button and I had a chart, and the button just hit some API route that said give me data, and that data just looked at some pandas data frame and filtered the data frame and returned some JSON. So whatever JSON, in this case, it's a pie chart. So maybe it was like, you know, some category and some fraction and that sort of thing. But then, you know, this was a neat toy problem. But then as you start adding feature requests, like pretty quickly, like my code just became a mess because it was just, you know, even if I tried to organize it, there would be, you know, one file that was like full of different routes and one file that was like full of different ways to transform the JavaScript, and then I had this whole separate JavaScript project to maintain, and so it was not. It didn't really work for me, and it wasn't something that I felt like I could go if for whatever reason I was no longer at Stitch Fix, that whoever inherited my code would be able to actually read it. And so, because I spent some time working with Shiny, there was a lot of Shiny that I actually really appreciated. And one of the things is sort of how they broke down the layout of the page. And so, in most cases, for the kinds of things that I'm going to be doing, I'm just interested in, I have some data frame, think of it as like a table or, you know, in a SQL database or something, and I have some sort of set of filters that I want to select, some dimensions of the data, and just see that data frame cut under those dimensions. And then so in this UI.R file, you get to specify, oh, these are the different buttons and widgets I want, and then you get to specify like the different kind of charts and tables and things. And then there's a separate server.R where you can like specify how all these things actually get the data. So going back to my first example, I have a simple abstraction. So I now have included the JSON part and the API route as like a UI component, and then the UI component could be like a filter or it could be a chart. And the things that are different are how it gets and how it sends data. And in all these cases, I wanted the ability to use like just a pandas data frame, and so I wrote some really like basic like wrappers just to take in a data frame, filter with whatever you pass it, and then like spit out this JSON blob. And there's nothing that says it has to be pandas. You can actually like hook it up to any other sort of data source. Okay. So in the end, I spent a week. I took the one dashboard that I made and I cut it up in a bunch of different ways. I decided on a JavaScript pattern, and I wrote some Python wrappers. But I didn't write any documentations or any tests. So I sort of threw this thing together. All that also that I could have like one script where I said, you know, I'm going to have a UI, I'm going to add a button, I'm going to add a chart, and like that's all I want. And all the other stuff was taken care of in either the JavaScript or the Python. So then, as sort of like a dare, it wasn't really a dare, but like our platform director on our algorithms team said, "Oh, just make it open source," right? He's like, "There's nothing that's Stitch Fix proprietary in there. Just put it out there." So I said, "Sure." And then at the time, we were also trying to write more blog posts, and so our like tech branding team said, "Oh, write a blog post." So I sort of threw everything together, thinking that there would be zero interest. It's like, I don't know that how many people are actually building Flask apps with React and Python. It seemed like a lot more people using Shiny, and so the first lesson I learned is not to plan for zero interest. So I had no documentation, no tests. I was like, "Oh, it's gonna be no problem. Nobody's gonna look at this anyways." And so what I thought was gonna happen would be that like my GitHub repo would be like empty, and then like nobody would look at it. What actually happened was it like climbed to number 2 on Hacker News. It got like 1,500 stars, and like suddenly a lot of people were like really excited about it, which was overwhelming and it was awesome, but at the same time, it was like, okay, maybe it was a little premature to release it. And so like naturally had lots and lots of issues. And because one of the things, I don't know how many of you have tried to build a project in like React lately or any of these other things, but there's a lot of dependencies, right? And so anytime you introduce a dependency, that's just another point that someone could have a problem installing, right? And so you think about all the people out there using different browsers, different versions of Python. If they happen to grab the wrong version of some JavaScript library, like there's lots of ways that this could sort of fall apart. And so I spent a lot of time over the last year trying to think about, okay, how can I reduce those dependencies? In fact, I think the last time I pushed a version, it was to wrap up a bunch of functionality, so that way there was some like default JavaScript libraries that would automatically pull, and so if you like ran this command line function, it would just automatically install all of those things, and then you should be good to go. But these things are constantly changing, so it's sort of no guarantee. So the second lesson was then, to read some guides first before I just start throwing things out there. So I think I found like how to submit to PyPy and to pip install and all that sort of thing. But the particular walkthrough that I went through like didn't have anything about like test servers and all that stuff, so I like made a whole bunch of mistakes first. And so as like a reference, I've included a bunch of links for things I found were pretty useful. So because some users were Python 2 and some users were Python 3, Conda environments were really great because I could have a 2 environment and a 3 environment, test everything separately, make sure everything works, and then publish. Or you could use virtual env. I happen to use Conda. And then there was some nice like PyPy tutorials about, if you're going to open source a Python package, here are all the steps that you need to take. And I wish I had found those the first time that I searched, but nevertheless, they're there for future reference. So the next part was making straightforward examples and documentation. So I sort of thought, well, the code is sort of the documentation. There's a lot of different things going on, and it is one way to the way that I happen to learn new projects is to look at the source code. I realize not everybody does that, but it's a good way to sort of see how things are going. And so there's documentation now, but even then, it's really hard to convey a lot of ideas without in concise documentation. So I think the problem that I had was I sort of thought when I was putting all of this together was like, okay, how can I show the most functionality in like a few examples as possible? And so I showed these like, at first I think I had 4 different examples. One was using this metrics graphics library, which is pretty cool. It's by the folks at Mozilla. And then data tables, because a lot of the kinds of things that I was using in Shiny were just these like simple bar charts or line charts and tables. And then maps are always cool, so I decided to show a map. And then there's some D3 integrations where you can like have custom D3 with a cross filter kind of thing. And then in data tables, that library is like super flexible. So you can even put in SVGs in a column and then have a function that renders that. And so in this example, I think I had like confidence intervals or something like that, which is kind of cool. But let's say that you're a user and you're like, how do I make a table? So say, okay, you see something called data tables. So I go look at this, but actually in that example, I'm trying to show that like how you can sort of hijack some of the data tables parameters, how you can just bind to a single UI component, how you don't have to have a layout. And so there's all these things that like at the time I was like, oh, this is great because I'm showing all these different like features. But like if you're a user, you actually are probably just interested in like making a table, right? And so I think it became too confusing because like someone would try one example and have no problems, and another person would try a different one and then just be completely lost and give up. And so I think making good examples is really hard, and it takes a lot of like reflection to try to figure out how you can make it as useful as possible. And so, let's see, I'm doing pretty good on time. And so the last lesson that I wanted to go over was just make sure that it's something that you love, because it's going to take a lot of free time, right? And so like at first I was thinking that open source is collaboration, right? Like this was my attempt to just put an idea out there. I was hoping that I would get some design feedback because what I was doing was pretty different. There's a lot of people that just it's very easy when you work with a scripting language to just write lots and lots of scripts. And so to try to encapsulate and then modularize like some of these components was something that hadn't been done before. And so like in the JavaScript, it's actually using a factory pattern. So the Python actually just passes a string that says what type it is. So the Python says, this is a button. And in the little bit of templated code that gets written out is component with type is button. And the JavaScript says, okay, I know what a button is. And then it goes and builds a JavaScript button. So it's different from some of these templated approaches where they just like create a template for all the different kinds of things you could possibly want, and then create those things at runtime, whereas this was trying to figure it out. So I was hoping then like the people I work with would contribute widgets because we have a number of like really, really beautiful dashboards. Like some of the people on my team like have like gone out of their way to make some of these like awesome visualizations. Or at least I was hoping for some like new use cases. But really, it's just been primarily me working on Pyxley. I have like 3 or 4 dashboards. There are some people that will use it now and then, and I do hear from people. But I think the biggest barrier is that if you know how to do something, you'll just do it, right? And so taking the time to like learn a different framework is always going to be a hurdle. And so then like when it comes to my free time about like what I'm going to work on, so I usually think of it as like, oh well, I could like maintain Pyxley, or I could do some like hobby or something, or exercise. And I found that if I don't exercise, that I get big real quick. So and the same thing goes with just like not striking a good balance. And so I like, especially working at a startup, even though Stitch Fix and our data science team has become quite large, like there's still a sense of urgency for a lot of the work that we do. And so trying to like strike a balance is hard. And so what often happens though is that like Pyxley often loses, right? Because my job is more than just the dashboards, and so I'm not really touching them very much, and it's just it's not something that I prioritize. And the reason for that is I wanted to share the bigger picture. And so this is an example of a Stitch Fix web app, one of the ones that I maintain. We use S3 as our source of truth, and then we use things like Spark and Redshift and whatever to get at the data. So I have raw data that lives in S3. I run a Spark ETL that generates some features for me. So like, maybe it's like binary indicator variables. Maybe it's like counts of the number of like SKUs that we have. And then because like I'm working with styles, like once you go from having a lot of data for clients or whatever to like the style level, that becomes much, much smaller. And so then I can just pop it into Python and run like sklearn or something. And so then I can output recommendations. And so that all sits in S3, and then I have a Flask application that just talks to S3, pulls the data into a data frame, and then I have Pyxley sitting on that, and then there's the React component on top of that. And so one of the reasons this works so well is we have a super awesome data platform team that has built some amazing tools. So all of the integration between like S3 and Spark and like Redshift and whatever is taken care of. We use Genie for scheduling the Spark jobs, and then we have a bunch of like custom like readers and writers for S3. So, so this is a lot of stuff to maintain, and the dashboard is just the last bit of it, right? So it's a pretty small part of my job. In fact, there's even another part of this, which is like all of the modeling and data analysis that goes into it. That is also a huge time sink. And so I guess at the end of the day, I may be spending, like 10% of my time working on just the front end layer. And so the good thing, though, is that I haven't really had to write much JavaScript over the course of the last year because I've been using Pyxley. The only JavaScript that I've been really writing is like when I want to update something. And so my JavaScript skills are very, very poor at the moment. The last time I tried to like look at anything, it was much more difficult than before. But then, one thing that I'm realizing is if you integrate with JavaScript, it takes constant attention. And part of that is, React. So I chose to use React, but React is evolving so quickly. There's been a lot of design changes, and in the last year, they've gone from like version 0.13 to version 15.3, or I'm not even sure if that's the current version. But they also used to have this thing called PyReact, so I don't know how many of you are familiar with React, but what React does, it allows you to write this JSX code, which is sort of a mix of JavaScript and HTML, and then it transpiles that into JavaScript. Well, PyReact was this Python module that would take a string, and so it was perfect for templates because you could just put in all your stuff, transpile that to some JavaScript, and spit it out. Well, they deprecated that in favor of Webpack and Babel and all these other like build tools. And so I had to remove that piece of it and come up with a new sort of build process. And then other libraries have like big API changes. And so a number of them are not to the like version 1.0 yet. And so there's always going to be interface changes. Let's see. So maintaining an open source project has been a bit of an adventure. It's been both awesome and like overwhelming because it's great when you hear that someone's using something that you built, but then it's also very difficult to try to fit in time to help new people or to come up with new features and all these things. And so it's like there are always going to be bugs. There are always going to be like there will never be like enough documentation and tested examples for everyone. It's been a bit of a challenge, and so the future for this project, I'm going to try to keep up with React the best that I can. I think I'm in version 14 or 0.14 or something, but for right now, it seems to work pretty well. I think the one barrier to entry at the moment is this is not really something for people who have never set up a Flask app. The nice thing is Flask is like really easy to set up a hello world, and so once you get familiar with just sort of how things are moving around, it's not so bad. But that is a barrier. So if someone is used to some other framework, then it's not so accessible. And so I realized that was kind of quick, but that's what I have. So here's my contact information. I took all these like images from like Final Fantasy, and there's a documentation and the GitHub repository. Thanks. Okay, plenty of questions. Yes?
Knowing what you know now, would you do it again on so-called air?
I think I would spend a lot more time on the examples and trying to make it easier. Because what I was going for was something like Shiny, where you could just have some script that defines the UI. And so like one of my, or actually all my projects, they're really heavy on the data manipulation. Like there's a big part of it that's just like pivoting and aggregating all these things, and then I just have one script that's the build UI part. And so that works out really well. And I think communicating that has been the hardest part, because I think people immediately see like, oh, I have to do all these other things, and it can be overwhelming. So. Yes?
Before open sourcing this, how much time did you do any work to like make a contributor's guide or anything? Did you try and make it easy for people?
No. Oh, sorry. Sorry, I repeat the question. Before I open sourced, did I do any work on like making a contributor's guide or anything like that? No, I really just sort of put it out there. It was more of like just checking public on GitHub than anything. Yes?
Would you ever use the same tools if you could go back in time and start over, like would you stuck with React and knowing how volatile it was going to be?
The question is, would I use the same tools going back in time, knowing that React has been so volatile? I really like React in the sense that the way it's organized makes a lot of sense to me, and it's actually made this whole thing really easy, because then I can just sort of, like, the code is very modular. So I can just have some set of like filters, like buttons or drop downs or whatever, and the layout is very similar. So it's, yeah, I think from a design standpoint, there's a lot to like about it, and so I think that I probably would stick with it. All right, I guess that's cool. Thank you.